There's a particular kind of silence that falls over a football federation's boardroom when things go wrong at a World Cup. Not the silence of shock. Exactly. More the silence of people realizing that the thing they feared has already happened, and now they have to decide what comes next. That silence, in whatever room the Tunisian Football Federation gathered after Sunday, lasted about 48 hours. Then they acted in a way that, in the entire history of this competition, appears to have no precedent. A head coach was dismissed after one group stage match, not after a campaign unraveled over several fixtures, not following a run of results that made continuation impossible. After a single game at a World Cup, the evidence suggests this has never happened before at this tournament, across nearly a century of football's defining event. To understand why, you have to go further back than Sunday afternoon. Tunisia arrived in North America carrying weight that had been accumulating for some time. 5 months before the tournament, they had already parted ways with their previous manager following an Africa Cup of Nations campaign that ended in a round of 16 against Mali, a defeat made all the more difficult to digest because it came against 10 men and required extra time. A squad considered capable of going deep into the competition instead went home early, and someone had to be accountable. The man brought in to stabilize things was Sabri Lamouchi, French-born with Tunisian heritage. He came with a coaching history that crossed several countries and included international tournament experience, most notably a World Cup appearance with Ivory Coast. His appointment in January carried a clear brief: settle the squad, establish an identity, and navigate the group stage in 2026. In the 5 warm-up matches before the tournament, he won once. The signs were already mixed. Then came the match against Sweden. What unfolded in Monterrey was damaging in ways that extended well beyond the final score of 5-1. The manner of the defeat carried its own distinct message. A goal conceded within the opening minutes. Individual errors that suggested structural problems rather than isolated lapses. And then, most telling of all, a visible disagreement between a substituted player and the technical staff, captured on camera, broadcast globally on the opening weekend of a World Cup. That image is important. It doesn't just suggest a team under tactical pressure. It suggests a group of players not fully committed to the man leading them. The dressing room question, which is always present at tournaments but rarely made visible this early, was suddenly impossible to ignore. Lamouchi had also made selection decisions before the tournament that generated significant criticism within Tunisian football. A number of experienced internationals, players whose combined caps ran well past 200, were left out of the squad. The reasoning behind that approach has a certain logic. You're trying to build something, not just survive the next 3 games. You want your players to understand the system, to carry your ideas. But international tournaments at this level are environments where experience doesn't just add quality, it provides ballast. It steadies things when they start to shift. Without it, the first serious test can expose everything simultaneously. That tension between the instinct to rebuild and the immediate requirement to compete is one that international football managers navigate constantly. Tunisia appeared to be attempting both at once. And on Sunday afternoon, the weight of that contradiction became visible all at the same time. The Federation's decision came quickly. Within days of the defeat, Lamouchi's contract was terminated, and the name announced as his replacement immediately changed the nature of the conversation. Hervé Renard is, by any reasonable measure, one of the more remarkable figures in modern international football management. The white shirt, the composed sideline presence, the resume that defies easy summary. In 2012, he guided Zambia to the Africa Cup of Nations title in circumstances that carried an emotional weight unlike almost anything else in the sport's recent history. The final was played in Gabon, close to the coastline where a plane carrying the Zambian national team had gone down in 1993, killing everyone aboard. Renard spoke to his players about what winning there would mean. They won on penalties in a final that remains one of the most affecting moments in African football's modern era. 3 years later, he won the same tournament again, this time with Ivory Coast. 2 Africa Cup of Nations titles with 2 entirely different nations is an achievement with no historical equivalent in the competition. It established Renard not simply as a competent tactician, but as someone capable of constructing belief in environments where belief is hard to find. Since then, the record has continued to accumulate. A World Cup with Morocco, the Saudi Arabia squad he managed in Qatar in 2022, which defeated Argentina in the group stage in one of that tournament's most discussed results. A spell coaching the French women's national team. A recent return to Saudi Arabia that ended a few months ago. He was available when Tunisia called. He said yes. He now inherits a squad that has played one match, conceded 5 goals, and faces Japan next before concluding the group against the Netherlands. The mathematics of progression are severe. Tunisia would likely need to win both remaining fixtures and receive assistance from elsewhere in an expanded 48-team tournament, where some groups offer very limited routes through. That margin is almost theoretical, but Renard has operated in narrow margins before. What his appointment signals, though, is perhaps as interesting as a practical question of whether Tunisia can recover. This is the 6th African national team to turn to him. That pattern speaks to something specific about how his reputation functions across the continent. A perception that he carries qualities of organization, psychological management, and crisis composure that can alter a squad's atmosphere rapidly. Tunisia have approximately 5 days before their second fixture. 5 days to install a shape, a philosophy, a reason to believe something has changed. That is not enough time in any conventional sense. And yet, in Lusail in 2022, Renard delivered a halftime address to his Saudi players that has entered the informal archive of football's most discussed dressing room moments. They went out in the second half and defeated the reigning Copa America champions. There are certain managers whose mere presence resets a room before they've said anything at all. Whether Renard retains that quality and whether the Tunisian players have what's required to execute what he asks are questions that will begin to be answered on June 20th. The wider context matters here too. The 2026 World Cup, in its expanded format, was presented partly as an opportunity to give more nations a meaningful place at the tournament. More teams, more stories, more football. What it also creates, particularly for teams entering with recent instability, is an environment with almost no room to absorb a bad day. A 4-goal deficit after 90 minutes in a group that includes Japan and the Netherlands is not a position from which conventional football mathematics offers much comfort. The pressure that produced Sunday's decision is, in part, a product of the tournament's own structure. There is also something worth holding on to in the middle of all this regarding Lamouchi himself. A man who took the job 5 months ago, inherited a squad with unresolved divisions, made selection choices that were debated before a ball was kicked, and then saw everything converge against him in a single afternoon. The 5-1 defeat was his result, but the conditions that made it possible, the fragility in the group, the unresolved questions about selection, the background of managerial instability, those were not manufactured by 90 minutes of football. Football has a habit of presenting complex, accumulated situations as single events, assigning blame cleanly to whoever happened to be standing at the front. Lamouchi has worked across multiple countries and competitions. One afternoon in Monterrey does not fully define that. Tunisia now face Japan, a Japanese side that has spent the better part of a decade demonstrating they are no longer simply a respectable presence at World Cups, but a team capable of seriously testing anyone. After that, the Netherlands. Whatever remains possible for Tunisia in this tournament will become much clearer in the days immediately ahead. Renard arrives knowing exactly what the situation requires. The players will recognize his name, his record, what he's produced in environments not unlike this one. The question, and it is genuinely open, is whether recognition translates into something functional on a football pitch within 5 days against a side as organized as Japan. This is a part of the World Cup that rarely makes it into the highlights packages. Not the goals or the celebrations, but the boardroom decisions, the late-night phone calls, the question of whether a single person walking into a training ground can genuinely shift what a group of players believes about themselves. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes, in ways that are difficult to explain and even harder to replicate, it does. The tournament has only just started. Tunisia's story is already one of the more complicated ones being written inside it. Whether it ends as a cautionary account of a campaign that collapsed before it found its feet, or as something more unexpected. Probably depends on what happens in the next 5 days. That's football's oldest and most reliable truth. You never quite know which moments were the turning points until you're looking back at them from somewhere further down the road.